What you see here is just a very small sampling of what is available on Covenant Media Foundation. They have thousands of hours worth of lectures, seminars, and so forth from a multitude of people, to include Greg Bahnsen, on a multitude of topics: ethics, philosophy, theology, apologetics, you name it. Check them out at covenantmediafoundationnow.org, cmfnow.org.
Although I try to read what my opponent has written and know something in advance, it is far more important to me to know how to argue with people. So, whatever kind of thing the opponent comes up with, I'll be able to deal with. It's far more important to master the technique than the specific things that he has written previously. And the four things that I'm always asking myself, although I do it a little bit differently, I think this will be easier for you, is I ask about, is this arbitrary? Is this inconsistent? What are the consequences? And does he have the preconditions of intelligibility to argue this way? All right? Anybody have any problems so far? You understand minimally what we're talking about? 4 areas of examination. So let's begin with number 1. I'll try to explain it in more detail. How are people arbitrary in the way that they argue? The most obvious way is they offer a mere opinion. A number of years ago when I started teaching apologetics, I would not have stopped to deal with this. The idea that people will offer just mere opinions. But now that I've got a lot more practice and I've been out there and I've heard from people what they run into when they try to defend the faith, I realize I've got to say something about this. In fact, at this conference, I've had this happen in the past. Just about everywhere I go and put on apologetics conferences, I can offer people pretty powerful arguments, against unbelievers. And I think pretty strong arguments in favor of Christianity. However, almost always there's somebody in the audience who says, well, but then what if somebody says, yes, but my opinion is the following? I say, yeah, okay, well then you can refute that. And then they say, yes, but it's my opinion. I say, yeah, but you've refuted it. They say, but then my friend says, well, you believe one way, and it's my opinion, this. Then finally kind of hit me in terms of my academic, theoretical approach to apologetics. Out there in the street, this is one of the most common ways to oppose Christianity. People say, well, yeah, you believe that, but I don't. Okay, so I'm going to stop and cover what I would have thought was really obvious previously, but since apparently it's not obvious, we'll talk about it for a few minutes. One of the key, and probably the key intellectual sin committed by people is arbitrariness. The very reason why you go to school, allegedly, modern colleges don't teach critical thinking very well. They're not too interested in it anymore. But it used to be the case that the reason you went to school is to learn to reason, to think, to have some facts, to make educated, as we say, educated judgments about things, and not just be flying off the handle with, well, I believe this and other people believe that, and that's all there is to it. People who are educated are supposed to have principles by which they test theories. They're supposed to have a manner of reasoning that will allow them to draw a conclusion without just, saying, well, I feel this way, I feel that. I got to thinking about this. Why is it that Christians don't jump on that when unbelievers do that? Because the minute an unbeliever says, well, you've got all those arguments, but my opinion is this, they have conceded the case. They've lost. That's it. It's all over. If I was doing a debate, I'd take the microphone and say, speak up for the audience. Tell them this is simply your opinion. Because your opinion has just been sliced and diced. It doesn't make any difference if it's your opinion, it's wrong. But it's my opinion. And I thought to myself, why do Christians put up with that? Why do they think, oh, what am I going to do now? How do I twist his arm even more so he'll cry uncle? And then I think I've come up with the answer, or at least a good part of the answer, and that's because so often when Christians go to Bible studies, that's the kind of garbage they hear too. You go to Bible studies and you'll read a passage, and then everybody kind of shares their opinion. Well, I want to think of God this way. I want to think of God that way. Well, you know what? God doesn't care what you think. He's not affected by what you think. He cares in the sense that ultimately you'll answer to His Word for what you think. But nevertheless, often enough Christians, even when it comes to the most authoritative word people can have, they still think we have the right to sit around and go, well, but my opinion is this and somebody else's opinion is that. You see this all the time when we talk about the sovereignty of God. If I do a Bible study or preach a sermon on the sovereignty of God and people don't like the idea that God predestines every detail in advance, that's what the Bible says, even to the hairs of our head. But I'll have people tell me, they'll say, but I don't want to think of God as being like that. Big deal. You don't want to think of God being like that. Well, now, what if this last year I had something happen to me which I considered fairly tragic. I was very unhappy about it. It was a real test to my sanctification. I was diagnosed as having diabetes. Now, I already have heart problems. I've already had emergency open stomach surgery to save my life. And so it's tough enough, I think. You know, it's one of those times where you're wondering if you don't want to say, God, isn't this enough, thank you? But God decided that it was for my best, and I'm sure it is. But at the time, it was very hard. And when the doctor told me, Greg, I'm sorry, but the tests indicate you have diabetes, I argued with him, nicely and politely. In fact, I had enough questions for him. He finally said, Greg, you have to understand, I'm a doctor. Trust me. So I told him, I'm a doctor too. And it's my job to ask questions. I want to know more about this. But now, I didn't want to have diabetes. I don't want to have it now. It's not fun. But if I were to say, I don't want to think of myself as having diabetes, is that going to change anything? Why is it when it comes to something medical, we all realize, well, you'd be a fool. What if I were to say, no, I'm not going to take my medicine because I don't want to think of myself as somebody that's a diabetic. I don't want to miss all those sweet desserts and especially drinking the real thing, Coke and so forth. I'm getting so tired of iced tea. I'm telling you, I don't want to be like that anymore. So in my opinion, I don't have diabetes. That'd be preposterous. And yet when it comes to things that are far more important than our own personal health, things having to do with our eternal well-being, you still have people out there who will tell you, well, I don't want to think of God being that way. Or my God is not like that. Or if I were running the universe, I wouldn't. But you're not running the universe, and you're not God, and your opinion is really irrelevant. Please understand that I'm not telling you how to speak to the unbeliever. There may be a place for being sarcastic and saying, well, big deal, that's your opinion. But usually you want to be more polite and so forth. But you need to know that when someone says it's my opinion, that has no weight intellectually. Opinions are a dime a dozen. Actually, it's not even a dime a dozen. It doesn't cost anything. And it isn't worth anything. If someone wishes to assert that such and such is true, they need to do more than say, I believe it. Because the intellectual question that is asked in every department of the university, not just in philosophy departments, is, well, why? Why do you believe that quinine relieves malaria? Why do you believe that Napoleon was mentally unfit? Why? What's your evidence? What's your proof? Until somebody is going to go beyond mere opinion and offer an argument, some line of proof or evidence for their views, they haven't got anything worth hearing. A second form of arbitrariness that you should be looking for is similar to this mere opinion, and that is relativism. Somebody says, well, it's not my opinion that there is a God, it's not my opinion that God is like that, so forth and so on. That has no cash value at all. The cash value of the relativist is the relativist says, well, you're convinced by that, I'm convinced by other things. And so it's different strokes for different folks, as I like to say. Good 60s expression. You know? You like to think this way, I like to think that way, and you probably have very good reasons for believing that. You know, the relativist can deal with the Christian apologist who is kind of naive very easily by saying, oh, I've heard all your arguments, and you know, that's pretty impressive. But that's true for you, it's not true for me. I'm curious, have you ever heard people say things like that? It's kind of like, well, we all create our own reality, you know? Recently, when I was in Moscow, I went to an international conference on religious liberty, which in itself is very significant, I think, that in Russia, they're having a conference on religious liberty. And they held it, I think probably purposely, to be ironic and maybe a bit pointed. They held it in the former